Our financial systems are decades old. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
As science of necessity becomes more involved with itself, so also of necessity it becomes more international.
Climate change has been a tug-of-war issue for years.
And finally, a federal report today predicted possible catastrophic warming of the Earth by the 1990s with a strong climate change.
You've heard the term follow the money, and the money is from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. So in the name of green and environmental justice, there's over $40 billion that are going to be granted out through the EPA. The EPA granted $50 million to an organization called Climate Justice Alliance. This is what we found on the website, that our taxpayer dollars are going to organizations such as this. If you dig deeper, they want to defund the police, defund the military, either them or their affiliates want to have very radical, drastic initiatives that I think are anti-American. Who knows how much more in the future, and other like groups, because there are other associated groups with this group. There's no inspector general for EPA to follow the money because they don't care. Because all they care about is the mission, the climate mission, no matter what the radical ideas that are associated with the groups. So follow the money. We're going to be doing that in the Environment and Public Works Committee. That's where the derivation of this was. And I find it rather startling to me that the EPA is not doing, and the administration are not doing any better research as to where our American taxpayer dollars are going.
I think the average taxpaying American should be mad as hell because their tax money is being poorly spent.
They actually hide what the real purpose of the spending is. Sure. In other words, this is a question. How did you decipher? It will say humanitarian blah, blah, blah in Serbia or Afghanistan. We even give money to China, for crying out loud, which I think is nuts.
We'll give money to the Taliban.
What money to the Taliban?
Like a lot.
All right, so
I'm like, for what?
But
I want to see the pictures of what they did.
But they try to obscure it. But then you got to the bottom line, which is what I'm now scrolling on the screen.
Yes.
And that is $20 million on a Sesame Street show in Iraq, $56 million to boost tourism in Tunisia and Egypt, $40 million to build schools in Jordan, $11 million to tell the Vietnamese to stop burning trash, $45 million for DEI scholarships in Burma, $520 million for consultant-driven ESG investments in Africa, DEI programs in Serbia. The president's favorite. I'm sure you love that taxpayer money was spent on a DEI musical in Ireland, or a transgender opera in Colombia, or a transgender comic book.
It sounds like how can these things be real? But this is actually what was done. It sounds like a comedy sketch or
I have
something.
20 pages of this.
Right. It's not. It's a list a mile long.
If you had to put a number on it, how much do you think you've identified waste, fraud, abuse, corruption at this point? And again, we're going to be scrolling this throughout the program.
Well, the overall goal is to try to get $1 trillion out of the deficit. And if the deficit is not brought under control, America will go bankrupt. This is a very important thing for people to understand. A country is no different from an individual in that if an individual overspends, an individual can go bankrupt, and so can a country. And the massive waste, fraud, and abuse that has been going on, which is leading to a $2 trillion a year deficit. That's what the president was handed on Jan 20th, a $2 trillion deficit. It's insane.
For this fiscal year.
Yeah, we inherited.
Yeah.
And inflation is back. I'm only here for 2.5 weeks.
That was January.
Inflation is back. Now think of it. Inflation's back, and they said, "Oh, Trump inflation." I had nothing to do with it. These people have run the country. They spent money like nobody's ever spent. They were given $9 trillion to throw out the window. $9 trillion. And they spent it on the Green New scam, I call it. It's the greatest scam in the history of the country. One of them. We have a lot of them, I guess, but one of them. Dollar-wise, probably.
DEI and wokeism and transgenderism.
Well, that's all part of it, yeah.
And LGBTQ+.
Yes.
By the way, not in America. Other countries, not here.
You know, the amazing thing is when you see, like, the teaching of DEI, $9 million. How do you spend $9 million to teach? No matter what it is, you could teach physics.
Totally.
You could go to MIT for a lot less.
Expensive.
Yeah,
expensive.
the teaching of DEI.
Yes.
How much do you believe, Elon, you've identified in waste, fraud, abuse, corruption now, and how much do you anticipate you will?
Sure. I think
1%. No, because it's so massive. This is huge money.
So what we found now is 1%.
We're just gotten started.
As good as they are, they're not going to find some contract that was crooked, crooked as hell. I mean, there's going to be so much that isn't found. But what is found, I think he's going to find $1 trillion.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think it's a very small percentage compared to what it is.
Let me go to an area that I think is key, and you talked about this in recent interviews, and that is we don't need a Department of Education. Okay. And what some people are trying to do is stoke fears that, oh my gosh, my kid's not going to get the money for education, or grandma's Social Security and Medicare. This was a big promise of yours on the campaign trail. So I really want to give you both an opportunity to assure the American people you will keep, that money will be allocated for students, but with higher standards. For example, I would assume associated with monies given or
just
vouchers.
So much, and then Elon goes, but look, Social Security won't be touched, other than if there's fraud or something we're going to find. It's going to be strengthened, but won't be touched. Medicare, Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched.
Nothing.
You don't have to. Now, if there are illegal migrants in the system, we're going to get them out of the system and all of that fraud, but it's not going to be touched. School. I want to bring school back to the states so that Iowa, Indiana, all these places, Idaho, New Hampshire, there's so many places, the states, I figure 35 really run well. And right now it's Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, China. China, can you imagine, has top schools. We're last. So they have a list of 40 countries. We're number 40. Usually we're 38, 39. The last time we were number 40. And what I say is you got to give it back. So it doesn't work. I'll tell you what we're number one in, cost per pupil. We spend more money than any other country by far. It's not even close per pupil. Okay. So we know it doesn't work. So we spend the most and we have the worst, right? The worst result. When we give that back to Indiana, when we give that back to Iowa and back to a lot of the states that run well, they run well. There's a lot of them, 35, 37, 38. Now, you're going to have 10 laggards, but you're going to have 5 real laggards, but that's going to be okay. Take New York. You give it to Westchester County. You give it to Suffolk County. You give it to upstate New York, and you give it to Manhattan, but you give it to 4 or 5 subsections. Same thing in California. Los Angeles is going to be a problem, but you're going to give it to places that run well. We can change education. Now, school choice is important, but that will get taken care of automatically. We want to bring education back to the states. You will spend half the number,
grants,
and I'm not even doing
vouchers,
this.
like
I'm not even doing this to save, but you will. It costs you much less money. You get a much better education. If you go to some of these states, you'll be the equivalent of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, places that really have a good school system. You'll have those places will be the equivalent, and your overall numbers will get so much better.
Do you want standards associated?
The only thing I want to do from Washington, D.C. is make sure they're teaching English, reading, writing,
math,
and
science.
arithmetic.
Science?
Okay, a little science.
Science might help.
Sure.
You know, computers.
You're not going to have much of a problem with that, but that's it.
So your task now, and I pray to God this is successful. I really do. I wish you Godspeed. You know, Godspeed, John Glenn.
It's going to be, by the way. I really believe.
But there are legitimate areas.
Do well beside this. This is cutting. We're only talking about cutting. We're also going to make a lot of money. We're taking in so much.
What about
money.
his business? What if there is
then we won't
a contract he would otherwise
let
get?
him do it. If he's got a conflict, I mean, look, he's in certain areas. I mean, I see this morning. I didn't know, but I said, do the right thing. Where they're cutting way back on the electric vehicle subsidies.
Yes.
They're cutting back.
You lose.
Not only cutting back.
Hurt you.
Correct.
Yeah. Now,
You don't care.
I will tell you,
Well,
he's probably not that happy with it, but that would have been one thing he would have come to me and said, listen, you got to do me a favor. This is crazy. But this was in the tax bill. They're cutting back on the subsidies. I wasn't involved in it. I said, do what's right, and they're coming up with a tax, but it's just preliminary. But I mean, if he were involved, wouldn't you think he'd probably do that? Now, maybe he does better if you cut back on the subsidies. Who knows? Because he figures he does think differently. He thinks he has a better product.
Yeah.
And as long as he has a level playing field, he doesn't care what you do, which is he's told me that.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't asked the president for anything ever.
And if it comes up, how will you handle it?
Well,
He won't be involved.
yeah, I'll recuse myself if it is.
If there's a conflict, he won't be involved.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't want that, and he won't want it.
Right, and obviously I'm getting a sort of a daily proctology exam here. You know, it's not like I'll be getting away from something in the dead of night.
Welcome to D.C. If you want a friend, get a dog.
Well, I do have a dog, but I also have friends. My dog loves me, poor little creature.
You know the truth with this?
I need to bring him to D.C.
I know every businessman. I know the good ones, the bad ones, the smart ones, the lucky ones. I know them. This guy's he's a brilliant guy. He's a great guy. He's got tremendous imagination and scientific imagination, far beyond, you keep talking about a technologist and all, but you're much more than a technologist. You are that. But he's also a good person. He's a very good person, and he wants to see the country do well. And I know a lot of great business people, really great business people, but they're not really, in some cases, very good people. And I know people that would try and take advantage of the situation. This guy's somebody that really cares for the country, and I saw that very early on. I saw it really a long time ago when I got to know him. He's a very different kind of a character. That's why, who loves him? Young people that are very smart.
Donald Trump is the only president in my lifetime that tried to stop it. The only one. The Bushes, neither Bush did. Nope. When you're making inefficient power for non-economic reasons, non-rational reasons, but you're doing it for an ideology of global warming, when the Chinese, it won't matter anyway, the Chinese are polluting the hell out of the planet, excuse me. But when you're doing that, and then you're making inefficient sources of power, you still have to buy expensive power, and people know that. So California or New York, they know that. So if you're going to import power at night, it's going to be expensive because you have no choice. And then if 1/4 of your customers are not paying that, and you identify them as a protected species of indigenous victims, then somebody's going to have to pay for it. And you're going to pay for it in one of two mechanisms. You're either not going to invest in the grid, and then in California, you often get wildfires from faulty, sparky lines, or you're going to have to raise rates for the idiots that pay their bill on time. And that's what I think. You talk to people. I heard that word maybe 5 times in the last 10 years. Why did you move out of California? I go to Florida, Nevada. I say, I lived in California. And I said, why did you move out? Because I'm not an idiot, Victor. And that means I don't like to pay the highest income taxes, the highest, second or third highest sales, the highest gas taxes, and get the worst schools, the worst infrastructure, the highest crime. And somewhere between the alpha and the omega, to use that metaphor again, there's the reality. And the reality is we have large numbers of very poor people that we've imported or invited into the state, and we have 2 sets of rules to accommodate them. And one set means they are exempt from consequences of their plight, and the other group has to be non-exempt to pay for it, to subsidize it. And so that's just the way it is. And if you have a large community that's being paid daily in cash and doesn't obey sanitation in terms of disposing of garbage or refrigerators, or doesn't want to spend $30 at the county dump, then they're not going to be prosecuted. They're just not going to happen. I've called maybe in my lifetime of 50 years, 10 times the county or the state EPA when there's really big things like 600 feet worth of broken glass and barrels of oil. I'm talking about a whole vine row where they had oil and lubricants and paint, where somebody just took a big flatbed, got all of his neighbors apparently, all their crap, and then went down a vine row hidden at night and threw it off so it was a blanket. There must have been 500 fluorescent light tubes in that. There must have been 300 gallons of paint. There must have been 6 50-barrel lubricant old oil drums. There must have been, I don't know, 1,000 pieces of 2x4s with nails in them and sheetrock scrap. It was just like that. And I called, and I was told, number one, not only are we not going to take it out of here, and number two, you'll never find their names. They're not going to leave their trash there. And number three, how do we know you didn't do it? And so what do you mean? Well, this all has to be taken, the lubricants have contaminated the site. It all has to be taken to a toxic waste dump, which was about 80 miles away. And you're going to have to do it. Or you're going to have to call an authorized licensed removal service. Or we're going to assume you did it. Or you can just leave it there. The guy said off the record, you can leave it there. And I said, you can't even diss the road. What do you do? And that gets people really angry, all that. And so when you say white people, I don't think anybody understands why Hispanic communities on the border are against illegal immigration. Because once you have that incident in your life, or once your son is accosted by a gang member at school, or once you are a parent in a Hispanic community and you worked really hard for that you have a competitive high school advanced placement, and suddenly the classroom is swarmed with about 50 people who don't speak English, and you've got to go back to English as a second language, you get angry about that. You really do. Or the rents go up, or your grandmother has got to go to the heart clinic, and it's a Medi-Cal system, and she always had an appointment, and suddenly you show up and there's 50 people in line that have never been to a doctor.
Yeah.
And then the people who are promoting all this are wealthy white people on the coast who say they feel really good. I have open borders, and people in southern Mexico are getting all this great care. I just don't want to see them because I don't want to, and I have my own concierge doctor, and I get.
Dang.
So it's really bad. It is very bad, and I don't. It's Donald Trump is the only president in my lifetime that tried to stop it. The only one. The Bushes, neither Bush did. Nope.